We've all got better than what we deserve to have. And if God chooses to be doubly good to some people and not doubly good to others, that's his business. That ain't mine. God, first family. Speaking of doubly good to you, let's see. Now I got to think of what key this is into. My folks, they... Okay, that's an old joke now. Well, my folks, they were always the first family to arrive, with 7 people jammed into a car that seated 5. And there was 1 bathroom to bathe and shave in. 6 of us stood in line, and hot water for only 3, but we all did just fine. You talk about your miracles, you talk about your faith. Well, my dad, he could make things grow out of Indiana clay. And Mom could make a gourmet meal out of just cornbread and beans. And they worked to give faith hands and feet, and somehow gave it wings. Well, I can still hear my dad cussing. He's working late out in the barn. Spring plantings are coming, and the tractors just won't run. Mom, she's done the laundry, and I can see it waving on the line. Now they've stayed together through the strain and the pain of those times. About your miracles, you talk about your faith. Well, my dad, he could make things grow out of Indiana clay. Mom could make a gourmet meal out of just cornbread and beans. And they worked to give faith hands and feet, and somehow gave it wings. Now they've raised 5 children, and one winter they lost their son. But the pain wouldn't leave them crippled, and the scars have made them strong. Never picture perfect, just a plain man and his wife, who somehow knew the value of hard work, real love and real life. Talk about your miracles, you talk about your faith. Well, my dad, he could make things grow out of Indiana clay. I'm gonna make a gourmet meal out of just cornbread and beans. And they worked to give faith hands and feet, and somehow gave it wings. Okay, I think we've run out of time. But thank you for asking. We'll do that before the weekend is out. Why don't you guys all stand up, and I want you to sing again. Hey, I really want to thank you for coming and being a part of this weekend. And how many of you are driving home tonight? How many of you are like staying somewhere else? So good, many of you. Well, hang out with each other and get to know each other, because that will be a good thing for y'all to do. I know those of you who came up from Purdue, you're not driving home, I don't think. Okay. I want to start out with I want to end up tonight with the song that we started out with. And like I said, I want to reiterate once again that your assurance does not come about because you agree with what people tell you. Your assurance, we have assurance of our hope and of our salvation because of the reality of who Jesus is, and because of the reality of what Jesus did. And so while we're going to give you our ideas, and while we're going to do our best to convince you that we're right, because we are, it all goes back to Christ. And if if God is who Jesus said he was, we will be forgiven our doctrines as we forgive others. And so I want to focus back on Christ before we leave. And really, thank you very much for coming. And I hope it's as good for you as it's been for me. Here we go. This goes, Lord, I lift your name on high. I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life.
Cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Oh, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. So glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high.
Good night. God bless you all. See you in the morning.
Yeah, because, oh. I just want to remind, whoa, my gosh. Pick up one of these release magazines. The one with Rich on the cover is all gone, but he's got an article like in each and every magazine. So it's like a John Fisher article in CCM, except this is better. So you can pick up on. We've got a few of those left yet. So if you didn't get one, make sure you get one. And we'll open the doors again tomorrow morning at 8:30. And bring coffee and donuts and stuff. We'd love to give everybody coffee, but we can't. But we've got a good Chick-fil-A lunch for you, so that'll be like at about 12 noon, so you can stay all day. And then about 4 o'clock, we'll wrap it up, take 3 or 4 hours off, and then come back. So thanks for your patience tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Drive carefully, okay?
Hallelujah. You do the yas, you'll do the praise you, Lord. It's only this time we're going to do it backwards so that, and I always give this spiel too. You know, when you go back to the same places, you need to come up with new material, and I've only said one thing all my life. This guy told me that every preacher only has one sermon, which I'm sure all of us who have had to endure our preachers know this. That most of the time people have one thing to say, and they just say it over and over and over. They find millions of ways to say, well, I can't even think of a new way to say this. So, but I'll go ahead and give you the whole spiel. Because we talked yesterday about Christ blessing little children and how if we were going to come into his kingdom, we could only come in as children. And so that's why we do these songs. That and, you know Karl Barth. You're all familiar with Karl Barth? He's a great Protestant theologian. And do we have any Lutherans here? I love Lutherans. You go, do we have any Pentecostals here? Yeah, yes. Any Lutherans? Well, you should read Bart then, because he was a Lutheran and very famous theologian. And when he was very old, he was giving this series of lectures, you know, and people from all over the world were coming to, you know, all the star students from all the seminaries. And so he's giving his lecture, and there's going to be a question and answer time afterwards. And so all the students were sitting there doing what the rich young ruler was doing. They were going, what could I ask Dr. Bart that would really impress everybody? And he got done with his lecture, and this young guy stood. He said, are there any questions? This young guy stood up and said, yes, Dr. Bart, can you tell us what the most profound statement of Christian theology that was ever uttered might have been? And Dr. Bart said, well, yes, I can tell you. It's this: Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Sometimes we look at children's songs and we go, wow, those were so silly, those were so simple. But I'll tell you what, we never get past them. We learn how to put more syllables in our words, but we never learn how to put more meaning into them. And I think if we, people often say, Rich, when did you become a Christian? And I generally say, well, I was in the 3rd grade. And they say, oh, what happened? And I say, oh, I was baptized. And they say, no, not when were you baptized? When did you first ask Christ into your heart? Oh, I was probably about two or three. Oh, what happened? Well, I was in Sunday school, and my aunt was our teacher, and she said at the end of every Sunday morning we would sing, into my heart, come into my heart, Lord Jesus. So I started singing that when I was old enough to start singing anything. And they said, well, yes, but as a matter of fact, it was one of those TV programs that were trying to see if I was really Christian. Yes, but did you really understand that? And you know, every now and again you get asked a question that you really don't know the answer to. But every now and again, I think God puts really stupid people into your life to force you to look at some of the really basic, fundamental issues of your life and help you to see what the truth is behind them. And this is what I realized. I realized, no, I didn't understand that when I was 2 or 3 years old. But the truth is, God answers our prayers according to His understanding, not according to ours. And if God only answered our prayers the way that we understood them, we'd all be in a lot of trouble. There is something that is very holy about being a child, and we don't get very many opportunities to do that. So I've given you that opportunity this morning. You owe me for that one. Now I'm going to give you the opportunity to be like Jesus, which of course is the goal of Christian discipleship. And we're not normally very good at it. It's awfully hard to forgive people. It's awfully hard to love people. So you can be like Jesus for just a little bit this morning. It's going to be real simple. When Jesus taught, what posture did He assume? He sat down to teach. So singing is a lot like teaching. So this time when you're going to sing your part, you're going to sit down, and when you're listening, you will stand up. Thank God our churches don't go this way. And so you guys will sit down just like Christ, and you will say, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. And then you guys will sit down and go, Yah! Which is very tricky. And then in a concert, I always say, you can really blow your shorts out on that one, and everyone laughs. So please do that. And then you guys will sit down and sing, praise ye Lord. So you got it? So you guys will stand up, you guys will stand up, you guys will sit down. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, go. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Praise ye the Lord. Hallelujah, hallelujah. You messed up, buddy. Praise ye the Lord. Praise ye the Lord. Hallelujah. Praise ye the Lord. Hallelujah. Praise ye the Lord. Everybody, praise ye the Lord. You want to? Okay, welcome, Beaker. We'll get started.
Can anybody define epistemology for me? The study of moths? No? Yeah. What we know and how we know it. Thank you. That's exactly correct. I was just thinking, about that a little bit while I was sitting over there changing my guitar strings, about what we know and how we know it. And I can think of two ways, real simply. And the first way that we know things is we're told that by somebody that we count as an authority. Very simply. Think back about just about whatever you know or think you know. And most likely, somebody else told you that. For example, we all pretty much now think that the earth is round. Is anybody got far enough away to see that the earth was round themselves? No. The second way that I think that we know things is because we experience it. And I think sometimes experience might be a better teacher, not necessarily. For instance, you might have been told over and over that the stove was hot, but until you finally put your hand on it, then you realized what hot was. Let's do this. I need 7 people, 7, since that's a perfect number. 7 people to just stand up. 1, somebody else over from this group. 2, 3, 4, 5, 2 from over this side. 6, 7. Okay. Now, what you guys are going to do is, without trying to impress all the rest of us, you're going to think for, I'll give you 5 seconds. And you're going to tell us what you think, or you have come to believe the meaning of life is. Okay? Let's all, okay? We'll give you time to think. Everybody count from 5 down to 0 backwards. Ready, go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Since you had longer to think, we'll start over here. Okay? The meaning of life is? 42. Okay. Very good. Okay. To know Christ. Did you guys all hear that over here? To know Christ, to make him known, and to enjoy him forever. Yes. To have a place in heaven. Okay. Thank you. Love is the meaning of life. Okay. To love and to be loved. Okay. You guys can sit down. Yes. Mountain Dew. Okay. Great.
Be a sponge and soak up every experience you have in life and look back on it at the end.
Okay. To be a sponge, to soak up every experience you have, to look back on it at the end. Now, some of them were absolutely corny. I think we would all agree. Mountain Dew, we would all go, like to hang out with him for about an hour. 42, okay. Some of them were kind of up there, kind of elevated. When I ask you that question, do you guys all does something come into your mind? Is it a scary question? If I said to you, do you know why you're living? Does that scare you? If you were to have to give an answer to that at all? Is that scary? Yes, no. Yes or no? No. Some of you it's not, some of you it is. Okay? I think most all of us have some idea of what we believe our meaning for life is, or our meaning for living. Would you agree with that? And I think we all have a real struggle, because when we sit down and look at the way our life really works out, it seems not maybe to fit with that. Because I think that if we sat down and just went over what we did, like our hours in the day, probably if we said the number of hours that you spent doing something really exemplifies what you believe about yourself. Does that make sense? So probably sleep would be most of our meaning in life, since most of us sleep about 6 to 8 hours a day, and work would be probably the second thing. And we all get on that guilt trip, when we talk about our prayer life and everything. And the fact of the matter is most leaders in the church pray for about 7 minutes a day. Life is kind of a weird thing when you start thinking about it. I remember the first time, I think it's like around puberty. Something just happens at that point and you flip out. But that was when I started going, who am I? Why am I? What am I? And where am I? You know what I'm talking about, those times? And I think that I haven't quite outgrown puberty yet. There are times that I'm still asking myself those same questions. I think that we have a need inside of us to come up with an answer. We have a need to know what our purpose is. Our culture gives us all kinds of stuff to fit in there. In fact, there's people in our society that will tell us that life is just a circle. It's cyclical in nature. They'll say, hey, save your clothes from the 70s because 95, they'll be back. I read a thing, afros are coming back. Bell bottoms are like right on the edge. They're already getting close to being back. Wide ties, all those things. It's kind of cyclical. Think about those of y'all that are not married, don't have any children. Do you have those things that your parents say to you that you go, man, I'm going to make sure I don't say that to my kid? I'd bet you $5 bazillion that if I met you after you had kids, you'd be saying the exact same things. Right? And probably if you asked your parents, same stuff their parents said to them. So if you trace it all the way back, Adam and Eve were probably going, Seth, don't make me stop this car. If you don't stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about. There's this repetition just kind of over and over and over. The scary thing that if we think that life is just simply a circle, circles have no beginnings and no ends. There's no direction. There's no movement. You're not really going anywhere. Imagine life on, what are those things, those rides at the parks that go around and around and around and finally you throw up? Carousel? No, not a carousel. Merry-go-round? Yeah, merry-go-round. Like in the little playground with kids that like the big bully pushes you at like 95 miles an hour. Right. Imagine life on one of those. Never getting off. It's kind of pointless, kind of meaningless, huh? You might look at life in a cyclical nature, and there are some things in life that seem to be cyclical. Then you might look at life as if it's a line, where there's a beginning and an end, and there's movement. You're actually going from one place to the other. I think it's very interesting. You guys know what Genesis means, right? Genesis means beginnings. And I think that it's kind of not just a coincidence that it starts out in the beginning. And I think that as Christians, we all believe that there definitely was a beginning, at least to our history here on earth, and there will be an end. And there is movement from one point to the next. And we can even divide up the movements fairly nicely. There's the creation and the fall. Very quick movement right there. And then there was the time between the fall and Christ's resurrection. And then we have the resurrection until he returns. So you might look at life as linear. Or you could look at life, what I kind of like called the curlicue, which is, it just kind of spins around like that. It's a line, but it's got twist in it. And I think it kind of combines both of them. There's maybe a beginning to it and an end, but kind of inside of it, it kind of wraps around, goes around, repeats a few times, but it's still moving. Y'all familiar with nihilism? Nihilism is just, there is nothing. Life is nothing. Life has no meaning. If we were to believe that, if we were to totally look at life as if it was only a circle, there really would be no relief. Maybe the only relief would be down the barrel of a gun. Most people that are nihilists aren't that brave. They just say life is meaningless and they're grouchy about it. We believe that life has a purpose, that it's going somewhere, that there is meaning, that there is hope. And Rich is going to come up because he's the great enlightener and explain everything to you. So just give him a big round of applause.
How many, Beaker, don't go away. I want you to see this. How many of you guys have read Dr. Viktor Frankl? Pretty amazing, huh? You paid him. No. Okay, what was Frankl's big discovery? You put your hand up. No, they're lying. Yes. Yes. You know, I don't know if Frankl ever, in what I've read, ever actually talks about Christ. Yeah. But this was his big discovery. You are right. He was a Jewish psychiatrist. Of course, was in a concentration camp, and he found one amazing thing about concentration camps, and that is that some people survived them and some people didn't. And for Frankl, this was the star feature of the camp. Now, some people died because they were, put in gas chambers. Some people were tortured to death. Some people were murdered. But everybody who was in a concentration camp was exposed to the same diseases, the same deprivations. They were all exposed to the same conditions. And some people survived those conditions, and some people did not. And Frankl thought this was a very, very interesting thing. So his question at the end of this ordeal was, why do some people live and some people don't live? Why do some people die and some people survive? And this was his equation. And you have a spot in there that you can write this equation down. And this is a gross paraphrase of it, but it goes something like this. Our meaning for living, that would be the first part of the equation, that would be X. And then you can make a little, like, V with the point toward X, or an equal sign. In other words, our meaning for living must be equal to or greater than the task of life, or we will die. This is Frankl's pretty much 20th century equation, which is pretty equal to, there's an old Greek physicist who once said, if you give me a place to stand, I can move the world. Does this make sense? What Frankl discovered was that people who had some reason to live, people who at least had the illusion that they had a reason to live, people who thought that they might have family at the end of the thing, people who found a purpose in serving other people in the midst of the concentration camp, people who had a faith in God, people who basically embraced the goodness of life in spite of Nazis. These people survived. Even people who found meaningfulness in the idea of maybe I'm going to get out and then I'm going to butcher Germans. People who found some purpose for living continue to live. People who did not find a purpose in life began to die. Have you ever seen the movie Harold and Maude? Since this is a fairly mature audience, I will highly recommend this movie. It's my favorite all-time movie ever made. It's a real 70s classic, you know, with horrible music. And actually, the music is very good. Actually, another favorite movie of mine, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's a Zeffirelli film, and it really has bad music. Donovan did the music. It's just embarrassing. And it's such a great movie. It's about St. Francis, you know. And so I play it for all my college friends, my young, you know, these people who I'm old enough to be their father. And I'm going, okay, you know, gee, I feel like such a grandpa. Watch this. This is a great movie, you know. And the music comes on, and they're kind of going, oh, wow. The soundtrack is painful, but the movie is really great. Harold and Maude actually has a good soundtrack. Cat Stevens did the soundtrack to that. And Cat Stevens, I think, is, you know, miles beyond Donovan. The movie Harold and Maude is about an 18-year-old boy who meets a 79-year-old woman, and they fall in love. And they meet at a funeral. They both have it's a hobby of theirs. They go to funerals. And Harold goes to funerals because he's in love with the idea of being dead. And Maude goes to funerals because she believes that death is a natural part of life, and she thinks that life is a wonderful thing. So embracing the whole picture, death and life and the whole bit. You know, she's into reincarnation and all that. It's a little funky. That's why I don't recommend this for people who aren't old enough to watch with a little bit of discernment. But you guys are old enough to have discernment. Harold falls in love with being dead because he has this very rich mom. His father is absent throughout the movie. And his mom is a big socialite kind of woman. She's always having extravagant parties, and she's very interested in looking right and having the right kinds of stuff and all that business. And Harold is in a boarding school, and he's in a chemistry accident, and he blows up the school and realizes that his career as a student is over. So he somehow escapes this explosion, and he sneaks home, and his mom's throwing a party, so he sneaks up the back stairs and goes in his room. And the police come to tell his mother that he's died, and he kind of gets the sense that someone has come to the door. He comes out and looks down from the balcony and sees the whole scene, the police telling his mother that he's died. And his mother suddenly notices that he existed at one time. She suddenly notices him. And he's telling this story to Maude. You don't actually see this in the movie. He's just telling it to Maude. And suddenly he begins to cry. And he said, I decided then that I liked being dead more than I liked being alive. And Maude says this wonderful, wonderful thing. She says, Harold, a lot of people enjoy being dead. But they're not dead really. They're just backing away from life. And then she gives him this little, what I think is great advice. She talks about going out and living. She ends up by going, give me an L, give me an I, give me an F, give me a V, L-I-V-E, live. Otherwise, you got nothing to talk about in the locker room. This was a turning point for me when I saw this, I think around 75. Because I think a lot of us are really afraid of life. We're really afraid that maybe at the bottom of it, there really isn't anything. What we need is to find purposefulness and meaningfulness in life, in our lives, in our own existential experience of this life. But we settle for a number of things. One of the things that we frequently settle for, and this is a big problem among a lot of people, is escapism. We decide that life is kind of a dull, boring ordeal that we have to endure, and so we get into escapism. Some people do that with chemicals. Some people do it with food. Some people do it with sex. Some people do it with all kinds of things. Escapism just basically says life is a drag. The way that we endure this is to get away from it. We will not face boredom. How many of you listen to radio? How many of you have CDs or tapes? How many of you have a TV? How many of you watch TV frequently? Let me ask you this. How many of you guys have the radio on? How many of you have a radio alarm clock? How many of you use it? How many of you have the radio on while you're taking your shower? How many of you listen to the radio on the way to work? How many of you listen to radio on your way home from work? How many of you have a TV on from the moment you come into your house and you don't really watch it? See, this is exactly what I mean by escapism. We are so afraid of silence that we will clutter the space that we live in with any kind of noise, because when it really gets silent, I have a book I'd love to recommend you. It's by Ave Maria Press. It was written by Henry Nouwen, who used to teach up here at Notre Dame. Wonderful teacher. It's called With Open Hands. It's a book about prayer. Once again, he takes a fairly liberal slant. I don't recommend a slant, but he brings up some great points. He tells us some really great things in this book, and he talks about our fear of silence. Much of life is going to appear to be very boring, and instead of facing life head on and meeting it head on, what we do is we try to escape it. And one of the ways that in our culture, and that is very acceptable in our churches, is we escape it through noise. We don't take drugs anymore. I got in trouble one time at a concert because they went, yeah, I was talking about Christians and pagans, one of my favorite subjects, because I think it's so funny, the differences. And I said, like, one of the differences is this: when you go to a concert and you're with pagans, they're all sitting there going, and the Christians are all sitting next to them going, in a lot of circles, this is the essential difference between the way a pagan lives and the way a Christian lives. It's an unfortunate difference. Many of us are so afraid of silence that we clutter every moment of our lives with some kind of escapist kind of noise, some kind of escapist kind of activity. When you have an afternoon and you're exhausted, how many of you have a problem with being tired? How many of you feel tired frequently? How many of you, when you have an afternoon to do nothing with, you do something? That is amazing. You know why? I have this suspicion that we are so afraid of being quiet. We are so afraid of relaxing that we would rather exhaust ourselves than do what we need to do. I have finally realized at my ripe old age that I know I'm really sick and addicted to something when I know that that thing is wrecking my life, but I think my life is better with it than without it. Does that make sense? A lot of people, one of the things that we settle for because we are afraid to really look into life and look at it very seriously, because we're afraid that there's not really going to be any meaning, and whatever religious kind of language we can put around that void, it still remains a void. So one of the things that we settle for is escapism, and we spend millions of dollars trying to escape meeting life head on. Whether that is with drugs, whether it's with food, whether it's with sex addictions, whether it's with noise addictions, whatever it's with, we try to escape life. Another thing that we try to do is we try to sensationalize life. We try to make it bigger than it really is. We think that our experience here is supposed to be one huge Disney World kind of thing. And so we're always going around. For example, a good example, I love movies, like I told you. I have a real hang-up with movies because I really have to watch, or I would go to a movie constantly and never do homework, never make my bed. I would, if they showed movies at 8 in the morning, I would get up and go. It's the only excuse I can think of for getting up in the morning. One of the things that I noticed was, did y'all see Die Hard? Not a particularly wholesome, edifying movie, but I saw it, I have to admit. And I kind of enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty funny. And I love violence in movies because nobody really gets hurt. And so you get to express all this hostility and no one really has to suffer. Anyway, in Die Hard, I'll bet a good couple dozen people die. And it was shocking to me after I saw it. I went, the thing that was scary to me was that each time one of these people died, you laughed. Because the heroes in Die Hard would make a funny comment about it, and you go, did you see the movie, it was a Steven Spielberg, no, not Steven Spielberg, it was a Stephen King novel, which I'd never been able to suffer through a Stephen King novel, but I have seen a couple movies made out of them, and they make miserable movies. This one was called Misery, and in the course of this movie, you came to hate this woman so much, even though I thought she was so pathetic, and I like Kathy Bates. Is it Kathy Bates? I like her so much. I hated to see when she finally got killed. But the thing that was scary to me was that when she got killed, the whole audience applauded. Of course, this was in Wichita, Kansas, the murder capital of the state. But what was really shocking to me was when I went back and saw Die Hard 2, because Die Hard 1 was so gross, I had to see Die Hard 2. In Die Hard 1, they were able to entertain us by only killing off a couple dozen people. In Die Hard 2, in order to give us the same thrill and the same sensation, they had to kill over a couple hundred people. It had to be bigger. It had to be more sensationalistic. Are you getting what I'm saying here? That a lot of us are so afraid that if we take life in intimate, small pieces, we're not going to find anything in it. So what we try to do is we try to spice it up. We're always looking for that thrill kind of thing. Scares me in churches. A very interesting thing happened in Wichita, Kansas, where a bunch of people who had been going to my church, they were like in the 20-year-old group. They were going to my church. They'd been going there for several years. And they went over to visit the vineyard. And after they started visiting the vineyard, they decided to join the vineyard. So they went up and, went forward. And the pastor said, "Oh, why do you want to join our church?" And they said, "Well, because your worship is just so exciting to us." And you know what the pastor of the vineyard said? He said, "Go back to your old church. We don't really particularly need you in this congregation. Because this is what will happen. You used to go to the church where you've been going for about 3 or 4 years because you got a buzz out of it. So suddenly you come to visit our church and we give you a better buzz. So you decide that suddenly you no longer want to be faithful to the church where you're a member. Suddenly you're going to go to a church that gives you a better buzz. You know what's going to happen is you're going to get used to the way that we do our worship service here, and then you're going to not get the buzz out of it, and you'll go seek out another church. You'll end up being the member of about 50 dozen churches by the time you're 50, and you won't have helped anybody, and you won't have grown, because you will have gone from one goosebump feeling to another. It worries me that in churches, the demand among people my age and younger is that we make services more exciting to us. I kind of go, you don't go to church for excitement. That's why you go to movies. We go to church for fellowship. We go to church to be taught the apostles' doctrine. And we go to church for the breaking of bread. We go to church for the sake of sharing all things. We don't go to church for thrills. And yet we find that part of our religious experience so boring that now suddenly you can't only have church with a piano and an organ. Suddenly you have to have an entire orchestra. All of a sudden you have to have a rock combo. You have to have a backbeat in order to sing a hymn. Because we want a sensation. And you know what's very scary to me are people who come away from services where they've just been beat to death with a lot of sensationalism. And you know what? I enjoy those services too. There's something really cool about being able to go to a church. I like to do it every occasionally, where you get to clap your hands and you get to whirl around and you get to sing at the top of your lungs and you get to yell amen whenever you want, and there's a rhythm in it. It's that whole, there's a real tribal kind of exciting thing. But the danger is we frequently mistake that sensationalistic, wonderful experience for being a spiritual experience. It's not a spiritual experience. It's a fun experience, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if we think that that's spirituality, we've missed the boat. Please understand, I'm not criticizing an exciting service. I'm merely saying that that is not the equivalent of a spiritual service. Does this make sense to everybody? We live in a world that says that if it doesn't feel powerful, it's probably not real. Well, I have a feeling like it is real, whether it feels powerful or not. I have a feeling that maybe sound doctrine is more important than goosebumps. I have a feeling that a real holding all things in common is more spiritual than a lot of dancing around and clapping your hands. And if you want to dance around and clap your hands in the meantime, that's perfectly fine. And I think God gets a big kick out of it. I just don't think that's the heart of spirituality. We need meaningfulness in our lives, but we settle for escapism, we settle for sensationalism, and sometimes we settle for what I think might be the most dangerous thing of all, which is nihilism, which Beaker talked a little bit about. We say, you know what, life really is a bum rap. Life really is meaningless and empty. There really is no God, and I'm mad as the devil at him for it. Well, if he's not there, how can you be mad at him? That's foolishness. C.S. Lewis, I have a collection of his poems. Wonderful book, if you can find it. It's just called Poems by C.S. Lewis. And he has 5 sonnets that he wrote after the bombing of England. And in one of the poems, one of the sonnets, he says, there is a comfort, even a feeling of something like revenge, in fixed despair, which we are forbidden. The key word there for me, there are 2 words, is fixed despair. That sometimes we take such pleasure and we get so jazzed out of saying, wow, we're going to decide that life really does stink. There was a sermon in Wichita was preached by this guy who on Easter morning, the text for his sermon is, Jesus did not arise, and this is the good news. His whole premise was that the myth of the resurrection keeps people going, but what we really need to do is we really need to face the reality that life is a grim, desolate, empty hole in which we live, and once we've done that, we're going to adjust to the grimness, we're going to adjust to the ho-hummedness, we're going to adjust to the whole thing, and we'll be better adjusted people. And that once that happens, what will be good news? I kind of go, wow, if Jesus didn't rise, I sure ain't going to get up to go hear your sermon. Don't you love those shows on TV, all the environmentalists, where they talk about how beautiful the world was, and then they said, and then man came. And I'm kind of going, and you know what? Man is watching your television. Baboons are not. Man is funding your research. Orangutans are not. You might take that into consideration before you clobber me over the head again. We decide that life is really a bad thing. And we're going to live just to spite God for making it bad. Does that make sense? And I think there are a number of people who are into this kind of thinking. I know a girl over at my school who says, yes, God is absent, and I find him much more present in his absence than in his presence. What does that mean? She was a former Miss Indiana. I'm so disgusted. There is no joy in that. And ultimately, there's not enough meaning in it to keep you going. Sooner or later, you're going to get tired of being hacked off. And you're just going to get bored with yourself. I hope it's sooner. We need meaningfulness in our lives, but what we settle for, sometimes it's sensationalism, sometimes it's just escapism, sometimes it's nihilism, or that idea of being hacked off because life really is a bad thing and we don't have the courage to kill ourselves. And then Christ comes into the picture, the way he always does, which is what I like about him, is that he is present in his presence. And when Christ came to earth, he made a few statements about his purpose in coming to earth. Like once, in one of them, he said, I came to seek the lost. He said, I came to preach the good news. He said several of those things. But you can take all of those statements and you can put them under one umbrella. Christ said one thing, and which I'm sure we all know, it's John 10:10. He said, I come that what? You might have life and have it how? Abundantly, or to the full. Now, Christ did not say, I came that we might have parties. Although I have a feeling that if you're a Christian, I have a feeling that if we are filled with the Spirit of Christ, a man who was accused on probably somewhat founded grounds of being a drunkard and a glutton, the Christians are probably going to be better partiers than anybody. I know this already. If I want a good meal, I go to a church picnic. That's going to be a lot better than just about any other food I'm ever going to get. One thing that I love about the whole Mennonite Amish thing around here, they have great food. I think anyone that cooks that good is going to go to heaven. Christians already know how to eat. We understand how to feast. This is a wonderful thing and we should be glad of it. In a world that is hung up on cholesterol. My whole thinking on that is if we take all the fat and cholesterol out of our diets, what's the point of eating? Sooner or later, life will kill us all. We may as well go out on full stomachs. Christ said, I come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. He did not say that I come that you might have parties and have them more abundantly, although Christ had a reputation for being quite a partier. And I have a feeling like Christians will understand more how to party than anybody else. I love G.K. Chesterton. Have you ever read Chesterton? He's the greatest. I think if you want to go to heaven, make sure you get him read, because there might be a quiz at your ascension. Chesterton talks about two fallacies in people's thinking about drinking. He said one is the Omar of Rubaiyat, who says life is empty and meaningless, and it's horrible and tragic, and it's full of disgusting things. So a man should eat, drink, and be merry because there's little else in life to go on. He says we should eat, drink, and be merry because life is empty. And then he talks about Christ, and he says our high priest, which I love the idea of Christ being the high priest. It's a very biblical idea. And he talks about how Christ holds up the wine of the new covenant, and he says, take this and drink. Not because life is empty, not because you need to escape it, but because life is a great thing. He said, when did Christ make wine? It was not at a funeral. It was at a wedding. I'm not advocating here that we all go out and get bombed. I'm not even advocating that you have a glass of wine with your meal. I'm just saying this, that for those who understand the profound wonderfulness of the promises of Christ, we have more reason to party than anybody I know. But I also know this, that Christ came that we might have life. And while if you're really living, you're going to party better than other people, you're also going to suffer more than other people. You know why? Because other people don't recognize the tragedy of sin. Other people don't see what's coming. Other people don't recognize the real sadness of life. That there is someone who loves people so deeply that he died for them. And yet people continue to look away. If you're a Christian, you will probably, most likely, if Jesus was telling the truth, you will probably be persecuted for it. You will probably be hated for it. I'm not advocating that we go out and find reasons to be hateful. Speaking of Mennonites, don't you think it's funny how when they were coming up, and this was true of Quakers and that whole bunch of people, and I come from Quaker stock, so I can talk about this kind of thing, how they would grow beards, but they wouldn't grow mustaches because mustaches were worldly. So they did the exact opposite that the world was doing. You remember when I was a little kid? You don't remember this. Some of you guys do. Some of you remember when your kids were going through this. It used to, a long time ago, nobody had long hair except the Wesleyans and the holiness people. And they, of course, their women wouldn't cut their hair, and they had this really beautiful long hair. Well, I remember when I was in high school, then everybody got into, everyone was being a little Wesleyan for a while, and they all grew their hair out. Girls were no longer cutting their hair. And you know what was amazing to me was how these girls who had this beautiful long hair that they'd always had, all of a sudden started like wadding it up in little balls and putting it on top of their head. I don't think as a Christian you're going to have to go out and look for persecution. You're not going to have to go out and make yourself a weirdo. You're weird enough as it is. If we're going to live, we're going to party better, and we're going to suffer more than other people. You're going to love more deeply because you will have in you the spirit of who is love. And because you love, you're going to feel more loneliness than a lot of other people. You will know more how hard it is to be alienated. Christ said, I come that you might have life and have it to the full. Now let me ask you this. Why do you think let me start over. Let me ask you this. If Christ said, I come that you might have life, if Christ says, my purpose in being here is that you might live, then what do you think your purpose might be? I think you might have two. One, I think your whole purpose in life might be to live. To accept and to receive the life that Christ came to give us. Maybe our purpose in life is to be truly alive, and maybe we don't understand that, but you know what? If God says life is good, maybe we just don't need to argue with him, because in the end, he is going to win. A friend of mine once gave me a trailer as a gift, and they were pretty well off. I was a struggling young musician at the time and had no way of transporting equipment around, and so they gave me this trailer. And when we got home after one big long trip where we had gone through Montana, we didn't have the trailer with us anymore, and they were a little upset about that. And the wife said, "I can't believe we would buy a trailer for you and that you would lose it." I said, "I didn't lose it. We were in Montana, and this policeman came up and said that it was a stolen trailer." And she said, "But we bought it." I said, "Yes, I know. I even had the sales slip and everything. But this trailer had been stolen a long time ago from U-Haul, and they had, like, painted it over and reconstructed it so it wouldn't look like a U-Haul trailer. But this guy said, well, this, in fact, is a U-Haul trailer. It really is stolen." And he confiscated it. And she said, "I can't believe you'd let it go." And I said, "The guy had a gun." God has got more than guns. It does no good to argue with him. If God said life is good, then let's affirm that he's right. That's what faith is. We live because God has said life is good. If Jesus came to give us life, then maybe we're here to receive it, to accept what he has given us. The other thing that as a Christian, another purpose that we might find in life is not only to receive life unto ourselves, but to make life wherever we go. I will reiterate what I said last night. I said that I didn't become a Christian because I went to a Christian concert. I didn't become a Christian because I read a great book. I didn't become a Christian because of any of those things. I became a Christian because I encountered the love of God in his people here on earth, the church. And I'll tell you this, probably if you look back into your life and you say, why did I become a Christian? My bet, if I was allowed to bet, my guess would be you became a Christian because you met a Christian. You met someone who had a life inside them and who were possessed of a spirit that was very life-giving. And life is a very contagious thing. Life is a very attractive thing when we meet it head on. It's very scary. But I think more than anything else in the world, people who think they're enjoying being dead really want to live. Our needs are met through faith in God and not by our own striving. When we try to find meaning in life, when we try to create meaning in life, what we generally end up with is sensationalism. We generally end up with escapism. We generally end up with nihilism. We generally end up with a lot of things that we frequently settle for. We settle for a lot of stuff. Materialism is another way that we get around life because life seems so empty we decide that he who dies with the most toys really does win. I can find a million things that we do because we settle for a million things because we can't find real purpose. And yet Christ comes into the world and he says, "I come that you might have life." That's reason enough to live because it is God's will that we should live. Our need for meaningfulness in life is met through faith in God. It is met when we finally say within ourselves, when we finally articulate it in our lives, Christ has said that he came that I might have life, therefore let me live. Whatever that life might mean. Our needs are met through faith in God, through agreeing with God that life is good. We find meaning in it, and not by our own striving. Beaker's going to come up and lead you in a little exercise that I hope will be helpful to you.
If you keep turning in your booklet, you'll find there should be a page that says 25 reminders or 25 things that remind me that life is good. And sometimes we play a CD by a group called Lone Justice. I don't know if y'all are familiar with them. But one of the reasons that we make references to books and to movies and to different kinds of music is not really so you can fill your life with all that junk, but maybe just as a reference point. And please know that we don't condone everything that's in all that stuff. That it kind of maybe will take a little bit of discernment on your part to pick out the stuff that's good, the stuff that's true, and to be able to look honestly at it, and then to be able to reject the things that aren't so good or maybe aren't true. A lot of times I think we want real nice packages of easy things, and we're not really willing to look at something and kind of struggle with it a little bit. Go ahead and take, Salone Justice, sorry. The album that we would play is called Shelter, and there's a song on there called The Gift. And we're having a little bit of more copyright permission problems with that too, so we can't do that at this point. If you want to maybe check that out, it's a pretty intense album. To let you know, it's a lead female singer. She sways between kind of southern rock, gospel, headbanging. Kind of all different kinds of music. But on your paper, go ahead and sit down. Well, you are sitting. Gosh, just out of it. These 25 things are not things that make life good, okay? They are things that remind you that life is good. And it can be whatever. But force yourself now for the next few minutes, and then after this we'll take a break. In fact, let's do a little time check thing here. What time is it? Now. 5 till 10. And we're supposed to be done. Lunch is like at noon, is that correct? Yes. Okay, 5 after 10. 5 till 10. Okay, take 10 minutes, 5 after. You know what? Let's take we could go till quarter after. We start at quarter after, we would be fine, wouldn't we, by getting done before noon? Sure. Quarter after 10? Huh? At 10:30? Okay. Let's just after you're done. You can't go anywhere. You can't go to the bathroom. You can't get coffee. You can't do anything until you get 25 things down that remind you that life is good. Okay, so if you get done, and there are people that are still trying to do that, you can get up and kind of walk out, and we'll do that quietly. But 25 things that remind you that life is good. So yes. Oh yeah. Yeah, sure. I can. No, I can very easily. I was the first thing I was thinking of was just because it's so daggone cold out. You know how probably around May, when the first time you break out the lawnmower, and it's kind of okay to get out the lawnmower at that point, whereas like in August after you've done it every week, and you mow the grass and it's warm out, and that night the sun goes down. And you just kind of sitting, you should sit outside if you don't. And just the way the grass smells. That's something that reminds me that life is good. Another thing that reminds me that life is good is I have 2 nephews that are twins and a niece. And when I go and visit my brother and his family, I love to go because I'm kind of a night owl, and they go to bed, and I love to sneak in their rooms, and my nephews snore really loud, and I love to just, I guess it's kind of voyeuristic or sick or something, but I like to just go in there and watch them sleeping, probably because it's the quietest, besides the snoring, the quietest that they are most of the day. But that's another thing that reminds me that life is good. So you have, does that help? I mean, you couldn't say that Beaker's nephews snore or whatever. That can't remind you that life is good. But you come up with your own 25 things, and we'll start again at 10:30.
Your seats. You're being a very bad group of people here. Huh? Promptitude is next to godlytude. So, did any of you have a grandmother who quoted that all the time? Cleanliness is next to godliness. You know, and it took me several times through the Bible before I realized it wasn't in there. I just kept thinking I figured it was in Leviticus. Okay, we're going to get going on this second because we have some stuff to get done. Are you guys having a good, have you met other people? Are you being friendly with each other? Bigger's going to look for some chairs. Any questions about the last session we can go over while he's... I have a question. What is the key statement of the weekend? Yes. Very good. Anybody else? Yes. Okay, everybody. 1, 2, 3. Ah, great. You are listening. What are some of the things we settle for when we really need meaningfulness? Escapism, sensationalism, nihilism, and materialism. Some of you got all four of them, and I even forgot to make a big deal out of materialism. But I think materialism might kind of just be another form of escapism. I'm never really sure how it all fits together. Well, very good. You're doing great so far. We're gonna get going here with session 2. Are you ready?
Uh-huh.
Or actually, this is session 3.
Is this on? Is this one on too? Are they both on? Okay. We're going to start out this session with a couple role plays, and so this will be your big chance to be on camera up front. I need like somewhere between a 17-year-old and 80-year-old. I was going to say woman. I guess that would fit. 17 to 80-year-old woman. If you're over 80, please feel free to volunteer as well. But you will come forward and be forced into, okay, is she wanting to volunteer or are you just wanting to volunteer her? Do you want to volunteer? We're going to role play. Who's going? What time are we coming back? When are we eating? Where are we staying?
Shush.
Is Marcy going? She's going. I'm not going. I don't like her. Okay, and I need a guy role player. Okay, back there. What's your name?
Thank you.
Do you know him?
Yes.
Oh, do you guys like each other?
No, he's mad.
So you can still like him.
He's cool.
Okay, what's your name?
Laura.
Laura. And you coming up here. Your name? Mike. Okay. Mike, have a seat right here for a moment. Okay? And you're married, but we'll just pretend you're not, okay? And we'll take, you guys, I'm assuming you work together
With Young Life.
with Young Life at what
Where?
city?
South Bend.
In South Bend. Okay. This is what you will do. You guys will pretend that you're dating, and this is the scenario that you are going to argue or discuss, whichever you would like to do. You guys were going to go out on a date to need a restaurant, any restaurant. Burger King. Okay? And it was going to be a hot date. The way this worked out is... Okay. Mike said, or Laura said, what time? And Mike said 7, and she said, well, no, how about 7:30? And Mike said, that's cool. She said, okay, I'll be there. I'll be at Burger King at 7:30. All right, those were your words. And Mike said, Laura, I'll wait for you. So that was the agreement. At 7 o'clock, Mike shows up to Burger King, whips out a tablecloth, puts a couple candles down, orders some water, has it waiting there, and even you bought a flower. So the table was looking pretty nice there in Burger King. And at 7:15, you thought, it's getting close. At 7:30, you still hadn't shown up, okay? So you thought, well, maybe I'll go ahead and order an appetizer. So you got you some fries there, assortment of sauces, a little ketchup, some mustard. 7:45 rolls around. Laura's still not there. 8 o'clock, she's still not there. At 8:15, you kind of go, man, forget this, and you leave. Well, at 8:30, 1 hour later, Laura shows up. Mike is a little perturbed, having waited there close to however long it was. You're kind of upset because he said he would wait, okay? And you got there and he wasn't. So this is going to be your next meeting to discuss kind of what happened and who is to blame for all of this confusion, okay? So if you can sit here and both of you talk into the microphone so everything gets picked up.
The original agreement, I told him I was going to be there at 7:30, right?
You said, I'll be there at 7:30, and he said, I'll wait for you.
So we just argue?
Yeah. We just argue.
No physical violence.
So what happened the other night? Can you guys hear me? So what happened the other night?
Well, I forgot.
Well, thank you very little. I mean, I went to a lot of trouble. Do you know how hard it is to get into Burger King with the tablecloth and to set this up without being laughed at, mugged, or anything else?
I wasn't aware that it was going to be set up like that it was going to be that important to you.
Well, I mean, even still, so we say 7 o'clock, you say, how about 7:30? I say, fine, I'll wait for you or whatever, but an hour later?
You were right. I was late.
Okay. Thank you. Give him a hand. All right, Laura, you're not married? Man, you need to learn how to argue. Because you are going to get walked on your whole life. You're right. Wow. Well, we've been doing this retreat for 3 years, and those words have never come out the girl's mouth that played that part. Never, never, never. Well, that kind of puts a wrench in this whole session, doesn't it? Okay. What I need then is, next guest. I need three more people. I need 2 guys and 1 girl, okay? So can we get somebody from over? Okay, come on up. You come on up. You come on up. That's cool. And a girl from maybe this section, come on up. Okay? Okay, why don't you sit here? You sit here, and can you sit right here? Okay. And you just stand over there. What's your name? Terry. And Scott. It doesn't really matter. Scott and? April. Okay, and you guys are going to need to be kind of close to this. We can move it or whatever we need to do. Okay. Terry?
Yes.
Okay. Terry is a 17-year-old son of mother and father here. Okay? Okay? And the way this is going to work out is you guys are like super lenient on weekdays. Your curfew's at 2 a.m. Pretty cool parents. On weekends, it's 3:30. Okay? And let's just make it 4. You guys are really nice. 4 a.m., okay, is curfew. But not a minute later. That is perfectly known and understood. Is that cool?
That's cool.
2:30 weekdays, 4 o'clock on the weekends, but not a minute later. If you come in a minute later, if Terry's in a minute later, then on any of those times, he automatically forfeits going out on the next Friday and Saturday night. Okay? Cool enough? No? No? Okay, just on the next Friday night, you're not allowed, you can't go out.
All right.
Okay. And you are you a used car salesman? Okay, that's the agreement. It's really cool. It works out great. Terry is just Mr. Responsible Young Man, hard to believe. And what happens is Terry's out on the Saturday night and ends up seeing a car broken down, stops to help out, doesn't get in until 5:30 in the morning. Okay? There was no phone call. There was no nothing. He just shows up at 5:30. You guys, very nicely tell him he's grounded, of course, next Friday, which you already know. And that would be okay, except next Friday is prom. Okay? And so what I would like for you guys is to have a nice family discussion the way Wally and the Beeve and the whole Cleaver family would. And don't really go over where you were or any of that stuff. Just talk about the fact that you're grounded and you don't think that you should be.
So I don't have any excuse.
Well, you can make one. You stopped to help that person out.
Oh, okay.
But you didn't get until 5:30, so come on.
This isn't fair.
Why not? You knew the rules, right?
Yeah, but, this is not fair. You never stayed out late, night before prom? Or week before prom?
We're not talking about me.
Well, why not?
Because
do you
what
never
I've
did
done
that?
is not at issue.
Well, why not?
Because we had certain rules, and there was a certain curfew time, and you went past it.
You never broke any rules?
It doesn't matter.
How about last week when you got a ticket? You broke a rule.
Was I punished for it?
No, you got off.
Well, that's a different circumstance.
How? How's it different?
Because that was just a different time, different place. Right now, we're talking about you being late.
Okay, I was late, but do you understand why I was late?
No, why don't you tell me?
I helped a woman that had a flat tire and she had a little baby, and she was a little bitty woman. She couldn't even turn the nuts loose on her tire, so I stopped and helped her.
At 4:30 in the morning.
Yes.
Why didn't you call?
Because you guys never bought me a car phone.
You need to understand that when you make choices, you have to go along with the consequences of those choices.
So I should have let this woman and her little baby freeze to death?
She didn't say that. When you make choices, there are certain consequences, and you have to accept the consequences.
Yeah, but there's always circumstances that need to be addressed just in case, like ad-libs. Or, let's see, what am I trying to say? If something bad is going to happen to somebody, I'm not supposed to try and protect them, and yet I'm still going to be punished? So, in other words, I should have, in order for me to go to prom next weekend, I should have drove right by and said, let him die.
You understood the rules. You needed to decide whether it was more important for you to help this person or whether it was more important for you to go to the prom next week.
So you're telling me that if I was, say, I've fallen off a bridge, and you guys is either if you're going to leave work, but if you left work, you're going to be fired. Now, let's just say that I had a sore throat and I needed some throat lozenges while I was at home, and you guys really wanted to bring them to me, but if you left work, you're going to be fired. So you'd stay at work, or would you bring me the throat lozenges?
I don't think you would have suffered too badly without throat lozenges.
All right, let's say I cut my finger then. Let's say I cut my finger and I couldn't drive and I needed somebody to take me to the hospital. What would you have done? Would you have forfeited your job, or would you have cared enough about me?
I would have come home and taken you to the hospital.
Well, it's pretty much the same circumstances then, isn't it?
Did she cut her finger?
No, but she would have died.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good. Good job. Good job. Wow, there was some heavy stuff flying there. Just out of curiosity, do y'all agree on the first one with Laura and Mike that Laura was wrong? Do you or don't you? How many of y'all think that Laura was just wrong? Okay. And so you're saying Mike was right? Oh, what are you saying? They're both wrong? Okay, wait, what did you just say? Why would Mike be wrong? I don't know. Why would he be wrong? Why would Laura be wrong? He did? He should have picked her. All the way in the back. And you know what? Let's do this because they're filming, and what's going to happen is I think there's going to be, we'll ask a question, and then there's just going to be this gap. So when we're doing some of these things, go ahead and stand up and kind of talk loud, and maybe it'll pick up. Will that help, guys? Filming? Okay, here we go. In the back. Okay. Okay. That I understand there's a misunderstanding. I did this before. I still think Mike, the understanding was Mike would wait till she got there. Okay? I do believe that both parties were wrong in this. When we said, I'll wait, didn't y'all think that's what we were talking about? Is he would wait till she got there? So there were a couple things. He could have called her. He could have stayed there until like next Tuesday when maybe she would have shown up. He could have gone to her house. He could have done a lot of things. But what he didn't do was he didn't wait till she got there. Okay? So he was definitely wrong. She was wrong because you just were. And you were so nice to admit that, which is a wonderful example. And I want to remind me to come back to this, okay, to that little role play, because I want to say something about that. On the second one with the parents and the son, how many of y'all think the son was right and he probably should not have been punished? Okay? How many of y'all think that the parents were right? Where are the people that played the parents? Do you think that you were right? No. Okay? Son, what do you think? Do you think you were right if that would have been a real thing? They should have bought you a car phone. Yeah. Man, she like really drilled it. And she said, you need to decide, you need to choose whether helping that person out was more important than going to prom. I would like to say this. There were consequences, and they seem kind of harsh. We go prom, once in a lifetime thing, which all of y'all, how many of y'all have gone to prom? Okay? How many of y'all enjoyed it? That's amazing. Prom stinks, people. Don't waste your money. That's a special thing, once in a lifetime. I'll come to you in just a second. Once in a lifetime deal, or maybe twice or 3 times if you're really unlucky. And we think, wow, that's really hard. Couldn't they have eased up on him? But I'm not asking about the consequences here. I'm asking who was right and who was wrong. And the real heart of the matter was curfew was at 4 o'clock. And he came in an hour and a half later, which means he was wrong. Does that make sense? And man, he did a great job of like getting away from what was really at the heart, didn't he? You didn't give me a car phone, right? You got a ticket. Was that right? I mean, he moved it over to them. Just never, ever really dealt with the heart of the matter. And is it April? April did. When she said, you have to choose. Okay? How many of y'all are planning on getting married someday, eventually? Okay? And keep your hands up. How many of you are already married? And those of you guys that are planning, keep your hands up. Everybody just keep their hands up, okay? Now, how many of you guys, put your hands down, how many of you guys are planning on being divorced? Nobody. Nobody plans that. I bet if I talked to you individually, there would probably be a good percentage that would say you had a hard time communicating with your parents. I think a lot of us, and I have a good suspicion of the reason why, but we come out of homes where arguing is kind of a big thing. And we may either continue to argue all of our lives that we're in the home, or we can shut down and just quit trying to talk. For those of you that are hoping to have children, or that you do have children, I go, are you wanting to argue with your kids? Are you wanting to have battles? Are you wanting to have knockdown, drag-out fights? No. And when I see what Laura did, I go, what a beautiful example of bringing peace and healing to life. Because what Laura said was those unbelievable words, I was wrong. You were right. And it just stopped. You could have pursued because he was wrong too. But you were able to look at what you had done and seen that it was wrong. We have a need. We have a desire and a want to fix things that are messed up. If we were to walk it like last night, we were all wondering, is the heat messed up? Still wondering that. Okay? There's a desire to go, let's fix that. Let's make it right. Let's get it in here so frostbite is not a concern. If we were to walk into a room and flip on a switch and the light did not come on, we would say, man, there's something wrong with the light. If you were to go to a really nice pop culture mecca, the mall, buy a pair of pants that had one leg, you would go, wow, there's something wrong with these, and you would want to take them back and get them fixed. Well, I think fixing would probably be out of the question. You would want to get a different pair. You would want to make that right. When we look at our world, we see a whole lot of things that are really messed up, that are really wrong. I just had a conversation, I don't remember the girl's name, but she was talking about the pro-life movement and all that kind of thing, and I saw Schindler's List last week. Good film, great film, shot unbelievably well. And I don't mean in any way to diminish or to try and make light of the pain and suffering of the Jewish people during Hitler's reign of terror. There were 6 million or so Jews murdered. What is amazing to me is the number of money, the way that we can look back on that, the amount of money, the way we can look back on that now, about 55 years later, and go, how could those people stand around and watch that happen? How did that happen? What a terrible thing. And yet, I wonder, 50 years from now, what people will think when they look back at our society and go, those idiots killed 1.5 million of their own people a year. Stuff in society, in the world's messed up, and we want to make it right. On a more personal level. And I think even probably harder, more difficult for us to realize and to admit is that we are wrong. I bet that we could probably, for the most of us, count on maybe one hand the number of times that we've sat down with somebody else and said, you know what, I need to tell you, I was wrong. We don't like to say that. There's something inside of us that keeps us from saying that. And I have a feeling that a lot of times when we're praying, we kind of don't want to tell God that we're wrong either. I love this line that at the foot of the cross, the ground is level. Because what I think we do is we look around and we see people that are really despicable. And we go, you know what, I'm better than they are. And then there's a few people that we see as like just kind of spiritual and up there, you know, kind of like they're just really good people. And we go, you know what, I'm not really as good as them. And I believe that the cross of Christ flattens all that stuff out. I'm so tired of names and labels. Us and them. Homosexual, heterosexual, alcoholic, adult child of alcoholic, African American, Asian American. I'm tired of that. We're humans. We are all from the same Creator. And I believe that the Scripture teaches us when we break one part of God's law, that we are then guilty of breaking the whole thing. And so you know what that means? That means the labels don't really exist anymore. Maybe the only label would be sinner. Because you see, I would have to say, I'm an alcoholic. I'm a homosexual. I'm a liar. I'm an adulterer. I'm a murderer. I'm a thief. And I don't have to worry about you being above me because I know you're all that too. We're wrong. And we desperately need to be right. Rich is going to come up and enlighten you some more.
One of the things that I find really interesting about pop culture is the amount of energy people expend to discredit the idea of right and wrong, and then to prove that they're right about how there is no right and wrong. There's a group of young people from our church who do skits and stuff, and they do a skit where they're arguing back and forth, and the guy says, there is no such thing as right and wrong, and this girl says, well, I disagree. I think there is such a thing as right and wrong. And he goes, well, there can't be. And she said, oh, yeah, are you right? And he said, yes, I'm right. Am I wrong? Yes, you're wrong. Well, then there is right and wrong. We need to be right. It's a peculiar thing, and it's a thing that our culture does not accept. It's a thing, in fact, that is repulsive to modern thinking. Modern people will admit that there is such a thing as blue and red, but they won't admit that there's such a thing as right and wrong. They will accept that there are differences, and they will accept that there are polar extremes even, but they won't say that one thing is right and they won't say that another thing is wrong, unless it's to their advantage to say that something is right because it's going to work out the way they want. Like, it's wrong to kill a seal. Unfortunately, fetuses aren't as charming as seals are. If they were half that cute, maybe people would care about them. You know what I think is interesting is people are only offended about beating up seals because I think seals resemble people more than corn. And I think, you know what, why aren't you protesting that farmers are ripping the ears off of corn? That seems like an incredible injustice to me. That seems as violent as beating up a seal. The reason why people aren't concerned about corn is because corn doesn't resemble us, and seals do. So we have a society that has what is the religious right, and you know what? I got to tell you, I'm no more impressed by the religious right than I am by the liberal left. In fact, I'm just about as hacked off at them as I am at anybody. I get really tired of the religious right because I don't think they're really necessarily right, and I don't see them as being particularly religious. People, when we don't accept the reality of rightness and wrongness, what we end up doing is we end up making a lot of arbitrary rights and a lot of arbitrary wrongs. Like in this situation it's right, in this situation it's wrong. And that becomes a really, really dangerous thing. We need to be right. It's a funny thing to me that those people who most want to cancel out the idea of right and wrong are also the people who are the most interested in dealing with guilt. Psychiatrists will argue back and forth for as long as there's going to be psychology, they're going to argue that there is no such thing as right and wrong. It's just whatever works for you. You know why? Because they profit from people's guilt. People who are doing nothing wrong suffer from guilt. Where does guilt come from? I have this suspicion that in that we're all guilty. If we don't feel guilt over the appropriate things, we will make up things to feel guilty about because we have guilt and we've got to assign it somewhere. So if we don't feel guilty about the way we hate our parents, we will feel guilty about the way we overeat. If we don't attach guilt to the appropriate things, we will attach it to some inappropriate thing and we'll end up neurotic. The reality is we all sense and we all know somehow intuitively that we are fallen, that we are broken, that we're not all together, and we need to be made right. Somehow we all sense that there is such a thing as a real ideal. Somehow we all sense that there is such a thing as goodness. Somehow we sense that there is such a thing as real beauty. And somehow we sense that we're supposed to be those things, and we know that we're not. This is an interesting phenomenon if it comes out of nowhere. Darwinists are going to have a whole lot of trouble explaining to me where in the evolutionary process we came up with a sense of beauty. When an ape first looked at a shape and said, that's a beautiful shape, and looked at another and said, that's not. Freudians are going to have a lot of trouble explaining to me where this feeling of guilt came from if there is no such thing as right and wrong. Wonderful thing about Christianity is, what I like about any system is it breaks down finally, in the end. You really can't prove anything, and you really can't disprove anything. One thing to you young people, I hope you understand this before you go to college. Everybody walks by faith. Nobody walks by sight. That those people who believe that life is an accident, they can't prove that it is. In fact, there's a whale of a lot of evidence that life is not an accident, that it's really a miracle. And yet, in spite of the overwhelming evidence that we have to say that life has purpose behind it and that there is a design in the way that we are, there are people who will still stubbornly cling to some kind of a presupposition that says life is an accident, there is no creator, there is no design, there's no nothing behind this. Just understand this about them. They have huge faith. They have a faith that is astonishing. I was in a anthropology class in Ohio, and we had this assignment. We were supposed to go to the zoo and watch, I think it was either baboons or gorillas. I can't remember which one. I think it was baboons. We were supposed to watch them for 3 hours a day for 5 days in a row and then take notes and compare their behavior to human behavior. And I wasn't in class the day that he handed out the passes to get into the zoo, so I had to go to his office and pick up a pass. And when I got in there, he took advantage of the opportunity to kind of give me a pretty good looking over. So he pulls out my grades to see how I'm doing in his class. And he noticed I didn't have any other absences and that I had really good grades in his class. And he said, well, tell me, do you like the class? And I was so relieved that I had good grades because otherwise none of this would have made any difference. I said, well, no, I really don't like your class. And he said, why not? And I said, because I'm having to pay a good bit of tuition money to hear your opinions, and there is so much discussion from my classmates about your opinions that I don't get to hear what you have to say. And I'm assuming I didn't pay my money to hear what my other classmates had to say. They're as in the dark about what you think as I am. And he said, well, you know, anytime you get on the subject of evolution, you're going to have religious objection. I said, well, I understand that. I'm a Christian. I think your theory of evolution is repulsive. But I still want to hear about it. That's why I'm paying money. Your job is not to tell me what I want to hear. Your job is to tell me what you think. Well, the professor was a little taken aback, and he said, well, I want you to understand, I appreciate your faith. And I said, oh, no, Dr. Anderson, you got it all wrong. You're the one with the faith. If you can look at the design that we have in our bodies, if you can look at the design that there is in the universe, if you can look at the solar system, if you can look at gravity, if you can look at eye movement, if you can look at DNA, and think that this is an accident, that takes a lot more faith than I'll ever be able to conjure up. I've taken the easy way out. I believe there is a design because it looks so obviously like there is. I can't make a leap that big. Everybody walks by faith. So don't let it throw you off when people have chosen to believe really bizarre things, because we all believe something at some point. Not only do we all have to believe something, but we all find out, no matter what our first presupposition is, we all experience guilt. There are Christian people who will tell you that you're not really spiritual if you need anything, that if you really had God, you would have everything. Well, I kind of go, Adam had God. Adam was in perfect fellowship with God. He was in perfect fellowship with all nature, perfect fellowship with himself. And the only thing that God griped about in creation was that Adam was alone. Adam needed a spouse. In the presence of God and the happiness of paradise, Adam had needs. Needs are just a part of being human. If you want to get rid of needs, become a Buddhist. Christianity doesn't have a hang-up with needs. Christianity doesn't have a hang-up with people wanting stuff. We see it as part of the way we live. People will say that if you're a Christian, you are no longer supposed to feel guilt. I think guilt is a natural response to the fact that we're fallen and the fact that we do wrong things. I think guilt is as natural and as much a part of our existence as nerves in the end of your fingers. Guilt is there to tell you that something's wrong. Guilt is there to give you a little bit of a warning that you're going in the wrong direction. Guilt is a perfectly healthy and good thing. Somewhat. We are all wrong. And people have this instinct that says we need to be made right. We need to be right. And so here's some of the things that we settle for. We settle for power. I don't know how many of you come from a big family. I come from a fairly large family. And what we learned as we're growing up is he who has the largest lungs is right. Not only does the squeaky wheel get the grease, but the person who is able to yell the loudest gets their way. And so when you're having a discussion, you don't appeal to logic, you don't appeal to reason, you don't appeal to anything. You just appeal to lung power. And whoever yells the longest is eventually going to get their way. Or whoever has the nastiest threats and who has a reputation for fulfilling their threats. They get their way too. Power becomes a big thing. Why is America right and other countries wrong? Because we can blow them up. That's exactly what makes us right. Power is one of the things we settle for. You know what's awful about that is, I'll tell you what, sometimes you get awfully tired of being strong. And you know if you're weak, people are going to hurt you. People are going to run over you. People are no longer going to fear you, and you're no longer going to get your way. Power is one of the things we settle for, and we settle for it at great expense. Another thing we settle for is rationalization, which I think we're all better at than we think. That a lot of times when we go to God, we don't really make a confession. What we really do is we make an excuse. And we'll say, yes, God, I know that I just took a fork and stabbed someone in the hand with it. I didn't really mean to do that. I had just eaten a Twinkie. And because I'd eaten that Twinkie, I was getting a sugar rush. And in the midst of that sugar rush, I was no longer in control of myself. So I had to stab them. It wasn't really my fault. Sorry. We say that as if we had sneezed. It's more like an excuse me than a I'm really sorry kind of thing. You know, what is bamboozling to me is that you can have a film of policemen beating up a guy and they can get off with, and people will say, oh, it's not really their fault. They didn't really do anything wrong. Then you can have a film of a rioter taking a brick and beating a guy in the head with it, and the jurors can say, well, they're not guilty of anything. They haven't done anything wrong. You can have a case where two brothers murder their parents while their parents plead for mercy, and the jury will say, wow, we really can't say they did anything wrong either. What will it take for us to really be willing to say there is such a thing as right and there is such a thing as wrong? And in our own lives, we can come up with a million justifications for what we do. We can say, we can blame our parents for potty training us too early. We can blame our parents for potty training us too late. We can blame our parents for not buying us car phones. We can blame our parents for giving us too many material things. We can always find some kind of psychological excuse for why we have done what's wrong. The problem with that is, as handy and as comfortable as that might be, it doesn't really fix us. We're still screwed up, even if we can blame someone else, and we still make bad choices, even if we can say that it's not our own fault. Does that make sense? Are you following what I'm saying? We frequently go to God and say, excuse me, instead of forgive me. Rationalization is that sort of thing where we go to God and we try to make an excuse for what we've done. Another thing that we love to do is just avoid the whole issue. Pretend like what we try to do is that nice diversion where we go, but we did a good thing, but you broke a rule. But we did a good thing, but you broke a rule. But we did a good thing. Well, maybe it wasn't so good. And maybe if it was that good, maybe it was worth taking the punishment that you knew was going to come to you for it. We try to avoid the issue. If the issue is being home at 4 o'clock, that's what we have to deal with, not the reason why you're not there. If the issue is being somewhere at 7:30, you need to deal with whether you were there at 7:30 or not the reasons why you might not have been. If you said you're going to wait, then the issue is whether you waited or not. We find all kinds of ways to dance around the issues. We find all kinds of there are all kinds of things we settle for, and the problem with all of those things is we remain unfixed. We remain unhealed. We remain unput together. We've learned to cope with the fact that we're wrong, but we haven't been made right. Let me ask you a question. From whose throne does David reign? Sorry, wrong question. The question is this: from whose throne does Christ reign? And I've already given you the answer, so if you don't get it, I'm going to know you're really stupid. From whose throne does Christ reign? David. Was David the first king of Israel? No. Who was the first king of Israel? Why doesn't Christ reign from Saul's throne? A covenant was made with David, and that the scepter would never depart from his family. Now let me ask you this. Why did God make that covenant with David and not with Saul? Okay, she just said because Saul didn't do what God asked him to. Did David do what God asked him to? Not all the time. And here we're getting down to a very key kind of thing. We know that, excuse me, we know of, does anybody have some coffee? I'm back. We know of two big mistakes that Saul made. What were they? What was the first big mistake that Saul made? Thanks. Anybody know? Someone was telling me they really liked 1st and 2nd Samuel. So you should know. What was Saul's first big faux pas? Do you know? Thank you for playing.
He was supposed to go in and kill everyone and every living thing in some town, but he saved some stuff from the battle for himself.
Thank you for playing. Oh, very good. Oh, thank you very much. Ding, 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 ding. Saul made a sacrifice. Now, this is kind of the scenario. You know, the priest is supposed to make the sacrifice in Israel, and this is just one of God's quirks, and being as he is God, he is entitled to any quirk he wants. He decided that priests should make sacrifices and not political leaders, probably because he knows the kind of filth that political leaders are. So, Saul had his army lined up, and the Philistines had their army lined up, and Saul's men were getting nervous, and the Philistines were getting ready to attack. Well, you know, I think all this is pretty appropriate. If you're a Philistine, you're supposed to kill Hebrews. And if you're a Hebrew and there are Philistines lined up ready to kill you, you're supposed to feel nervous. The only problem was Saul is supposed to be the leader, and he's supposed to keep things all together. And he was waiting for Samuel to come to make the sacrifice, and Samuel didn't appear at the right time. So Saul decided, you know what? In order to calm my men's nerves, in order to get a blessing from God, I will go ahead and make the sacrifice. I will do this religious thing, which I think is very significant. Saul decided to do a very religious thing, and it really got him in big trouble because it was not what God wanted done. God is not always interested in religion. So Saul makes this sacrifice, and then Samuel shows up, of course, a little late, like most preachers. He shows up and he says, what is this that you have done? And what does anybody know what Saul said at this point? Saul said this. Saul said, when the Philistines were ready to go into battle, and when my men were getting nervous, and when you didn't show up, I felt compelled to make a sacrifice. What Saul basically said was, it was the Philistines' fault for being Philistines. It was my men's fault for being nervous, and it was your fault for being late. Because of all these things, I had to make a sacrifice. I had to do the wrong thing. It was not my fault. It was their fault, and your fault. Kind of like in the Garden of Eden. I love this, you know, because God comes down and he says to the woman, why have you done this thing? And she blames a snake. He says, because he tempted me too. And then he talked to Adam and he said, why have you done this? And Adam blamed God. He said, because the woman that you made, everything was fine, God. We're going along happily here, and then you make a woman. Saul blamed everybody and never accepted any responsibility for what he had done at all. Next thing that Saul did that got him in big trouble was what? And everyone was saying that for the first thing, so I'll just go ahead and tell you what they've already said, only it was just they just misplaced it. He was supposed to kill everybody. This is amazing to me. And this is one of the things I love about a leap of faith, is I kind of go, you know what? I believe in a God of love. I believe in a God of peace. I believe that God is a kind of warm, fuzzy kind of guy that's very powerful too. And when I read the Old Testament and see how people were supposed to be annihilated, it blows me away. I go, am I really sure that this is supposed to be part of, you know, and I kind of go, this is where faith kind of kicks in. That you kind of go, it doesn't always have to make sense. Just because it doesn't make sense doesn't mean it's not true. Saul was supposed to completely annihilate this group of people. I think it was the Ammonites, am I right? And so he went into battle with his men, and they did manage to kill all the soldiers, but they brought back the king alive, and they brought back some cattle. And so Samuel comes out to meet him, doing the thing that priests always do, and priests and prophets are always coming out to meet kings, coming back from battle. And he goes, what is this that I hear? What is this bleating of cows that I hear? And Saul says, the men brought back the cattle to sacrifice. Once again, he tries to cloak the whole thing in this kind of religious kind of thing. But once again, he does not say, I did this. He said, the men did it. Well, let me ask you this. If someone said, I'm going to give you $100 to lead an army of men in to slaughter another armed army, or I will give you $100 to lead an army of men in to slaughter cattle, which would you say was the surer bet? That they would slaughter cattle or that they would slaughter armed men? I would say, I would bet on the cattle. I'd say it's probably easier to get people with guns to shoot cows than it is to get them to shoot other people with guns. It's a lot less risky. If Saul was leader enough to get his men to go in and kill other men, why isn't it that he was leader enough to get them to kill cattle? I suppose after you've killed a half dozen people, killing a few cows ain't going to bother you none. But Saul said, no, it is the men's fault. They've brought back the cattle. And what happened then? The Lord sent Samuel out to look for a new king. Why? Do you think it was because Saul disobeyed him? If that is the case, then let me ask you about David. Do we know anything about David that he ever did wrong? A couple things. Our favorite sin, adultery. We love that one because we don't get to go to dirty movies, so we just read the Bible a lot. It's full of really juicy details about how David saw Bathsheba bathing. You know, when I was a kid, my grandma caught me reading the Song of Solomon, and she cut it out of my Bible and said that she would give it to me when I was old enough to really appreciate it because she knew I wasn't reading it for its spiritual value. I'm not really sure the Song of Solomon has a lot of spiritual value. A lot of people try to make it out to be a spiritual thing. I think maybe they just had a real healthy view of what a great time romantic love could be, even erotic love could be. Anyway, so here we have David's scenario with the adultery thing. And not only does he commit adultery, but then he gets in a whole lot of trouble and ends up actually murdering a man in order to cover his sin. He'd gone through all this stuff. Then Nathan the prophet comes to David and says, here's a story about a man who had a big herd of sheep and another man who only had one little sheep that was the pet of the family. And so the guy wanted the little sheep. The guy wouldn't give it to him, so he had him killed, and then he took the sheep to his own household. David said, that man must die. And what did Nathan say? Thou art the man. And then what did David say? I have sinned. This is a breakthrough because David didn't say, you know, it was her fault. She was taking a bath on the roof. Amazing, in Hamilton County, Ohio, there was a guy that was working at a lock-in center for delinquent girls. He took a 13-year-old girl to her grandparents, and on the way home, he stopped and had sex with her. She sued him for statutory rape. The jury found him not guilty because she had come on to him. This is not only an insult to justice, this is an insult to every man I know. It says that if a woman comes onto a man, he is unable to restrain himself from engaging. I kind of go, wow, I'm able to. I think he did a wrong thing. I don't think there's any question about it. David did a wrong thing, and the wonderful thing about David is when he made a wrong move, when he sinned, he accepted that he was a sinner. David did another wrong thing. This one isn't nearly as interesting. Does anybody know what it was? He numbered the people, which God didn't want the Hebrews to be like everybody else. He didn't want them to put their faith in the size of their armies or the size of their nation or what they had in their treasury. He wanted them to put their faith in him. And David sinned by counting the people. Once again, when he was confronted about his sin, he didn't say, well, it was, really it was the IRS. I don't think they had dragged themselves down into the depths where they had to have an IRS. David accepted responsibility once again and said, I have sinned. Folks, we need to be right. And we settle for arguing, we settle for power, we settle for avoiding the issue of right and wrong, we settle for rationalizations, we settle for all these things. And we really have to work hard to keep all those things up so we never have to look at the fact that we are broken, that we are sinful, that we have rot in us. There's an amazing little thing about the God of the Old Testament, who is the God of the New Testament as well. And that is, he doesn't expect near as much out of us as we do. That God knew from the beginning that we were going to separate ourselves from him. God knew from the very beginning that we would have hard hearts. God knew right from the very beginning that we were going to have short attention spans. God knew right from the very beginning that we were going to sin. And yet from the beginning of Genesis, throughout the whole scriptures, the overwhelming cry of the heart of God is that he longs to be merciful to us. That he longs to be gracious to us. David seemed to understand this. David did not have to be hung up about sin because he knew that God was more gracious than sin was awful. Doesn't mean that David didn't take sin seriously. Read 1st and 2nd Samuel, you'll find out that he took it very seriously. But what he took even more seriously than that was that God is a God of mercy and a God of grace. Folks, you cannot make yourselves right. We cannot, by our own efforts, get around the fact that we are sinful. We cannot, by our own disciplines, get around the fact that we are not spiritually vital in and of our own steam. Our need for rightness is not going to be met by our memorizing more scripture verses, by our taking more cookies to more shut-ins, by our shoveling more snow out of widows' lanes. All those things are fine to do. All those things are good, but they will not make us right. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. If we are going to be made right, it will not be because of what we do. If we are made right, it is because of what he did.